Good evening, and thank you for waiting. Ian Wallace, Vanessa Joan Müller and me connects, if I may say so, a long-term cooperation. We have worked together on a 3-part exhibition by Ian in 2008. I was looking it up today again, 2008. Yeah, for
10 years.
It's 10 years ago, yeah. And this large-scale exhibition, it was a trilogy titled A Literature of Images, was presented in 3 different venues. The Kunstverein für die Rheinlande und Westfalen in Düsseldorf, the Witte de Witt Center for Contemporary Art in Rotterdam, and Kunsthalle Zürich. In that time, Vanessa Joan Müller was the director of the Kunstverein für die Rheinlande und Westfalen in Düsseldorf. Myself, I was working as a director at the Witte de Witt Center for Contemporary Art in Rotterdam. And we could convince also the Kunsthalle Zurich to join us. This, when we were in the process of creating, curating, thinking about alienation, thinking about this exhibition, which is opening tonight, you were one of our, probably the most important at the beginning, very beginning, point of departure. Thank you for this. From my side, there's not a lot more to tell. Vanessa will moderate the talk about alienation, although alienation doesn't mean exactly the same like Entfremdung in German. Ian also speaks a little bit of German. I realized this yesterday while reading a postcard we received from Kaspar Koenig to congratulate us for this exhibition, and I couldn't read his handwriting. He could. So thank you for this as well. Welcome again. Vanessa, Ian, please.
Yes, thank you everybody for joining us so early. Just some pragmatic remarks. We will talk for approximately half an hour. Then everybody is kindly asked to go upstairs, where Isabella Fürnke's performance will start at 6:45, followed by the short but official opening speech by Nikolaus and me. And then finally you can go upstairs, see the exhibition, and see also this image, which is now right behind us. This is an image of the work that is currently on display as part of Antarctica and the crosswalk. The life experience is very different because it's both photography and painting. It's a work in 4 parts. What you see here is monochrome of shapes is actually canvas, and then you have these 2 photographs laminated on canvas. I'm very happy that we have this work in this exhibition because Nicholas already mentioned it. When I was director of the Kunstverein in Düsseldorf, we were part of this fantastic show by Ian Wallace, and I was happy to have a work of this series at Kunsthalle. They are really, really big. It filled almost like an entire wall. And at that time, we also had Ian for a talk at Kunsthalle. I think this work is a very interesting piece to start with, because the series at the Crosswalk is like an ongoing series. You started, I think, in the 90s, is that correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you said this morning at the press conference that in the end it will consist of 10 works. We reached number 9, so there's still 1 to come. But this series was, it followed another series of works that was titled My Heroes on the Street. And these were the first works of yours which had, like, for me at least, like a really direct association with alienation, and in a text you even mentioned this term. You once said that in this series, that is this My Heroes on the Street series, the theme was accentuated in the direction of allegory and functioned on a double level. First, as a reference to the Baudelairean irony of the heroic modernity of the flaneur as a figure of alienated individuality immersed in the supernatural spaces of the metropolis, and secondly, by turning the photograph to the ground of painting. So maybe you could talk a bit also about this My Heroes and the Street series, and then the At the Crossroads series.
Yes. First, I'd really like to say it's such a pleasure to be back in Vienna. I was first here as a part of an exhibition at the Generali Foundation, curated by Sabine Folly. And what a wonderful city, and what incredibly generous hospitality that Vienna offers to artists. And myself, I've come from so far away, the west coast of North America, which is almost as far as Antarctica. And for the theme of alienation, which is a little bit about space and about distance, it is, for me, one of the motivating forces that makes me active as an artist now for 50 years is the way that it brings people together. It brings me in contact with people in different parts of the world in a way that I would never experience it any other way. So at the same time that in my own work, I express my feelings about modern life, about this separation that we feel from ourselves and from the world around us, and trying to understand all the incredible tectonic shifts of reality that happen around us, that through the activities of artists and the audiences and the followers of art, we actually can make sense out of all of this, and it brings us all together. The series of works that Vanessa has been describing, Heroes, My Heroes in the Street, or a series of works that I initiated as a response to my own studies of French literature, in particular Baudelaire, and his Baudelaire's kind of attempt to express his alienated individuality in the face of a changing modern life of the new capitalist economy that began to dominate all forms of life in the 19th century. And but I, in my own ironic mode, would tap on the shoulder of my friends and say, "Hey, come with me. I want to take pictures of you in the street. You're going to be my new subject in the street." So this series of works called My Heroes in the Street is an ongoing series of works in which mostly artist friends, but not necessarily only artist friends, I would put them on the crosswalk. For me, the crosswalk in the sidewalk before we go to cross the street stands as almost like a platform, a theatrical stage, as we see in the composition of the sidewalk. Is the stage where we are confronted with ourselves as we decide to make our decision to cross the street. And in the background of all of these pictures of individuals, my friends, who are both of these are artists, that is the architecture of the modern city. The city that I've done other cities, but mostly Vancouver, my home city, which is a new city, and a city that's created totally out of a capitalist colonialism of the North American wilderness. And it's a city of high capitalist modernist architecture, skyscrapers. It looks much bigger as a city than it actually is. It's a small city where that is a tight community for artists especially. But for me, I can create works that bring up the subject of our relationship to this larger universe, of the economic universe in which we live, in which we survive as individuals and find ourselves as individuals in that. Now, from this allegorical imagery, there surfaces a lot of contradictions. Like, what does it mean? Who are these people? What does it mean? How does one represent consciousness of the individual within the frame of the objectivity of a photograph, for one thing, which only shows the exterior phenomena? It cannot represent actual thinking and actual feeling. So there's a lot of contradictions that exist in these images here that I totally acknowledge, and which it's about identifying with certain kind of frameworks of feeling. And of course, there's one philosopher and writer who I have an homage to his presence in the world, and that's the philosopher Walter Benjamine. And one of the pictures that we'll see in the exhibition is an homage to Walter Benjamine, who wrote very much and was very much involved with the critique of the concept of alienation, particularly from a Marxist point of view. But in these works of My Heroes on the Street, I'm really focused on personalizing it. This is the man on the right-hand side, on the left-hand, is Christian Kleagle, a young artist who lives in Toronto, who does mostly architectural artworks about architecture and such. I asked him, I said, can you come? I'll include you. On the woman on the other side of the street, it's the same street, by the way. I always position a man on one corner and a woman on the other corner in this series at the crosswalk, which is only going to be 10. My Heroes in the Streets, by the way, is a much broader and longer lasting series. This is a series within the series. This is Una Knox, a photographer who lives now in London. And I sent her the picture here, and she was very excited. I said, what's going to be exhibited? You're going to be in the Kunsthalle in Zurich, in Vienna, in Wien. And she was very excited by that. So what I find, about this question of alienation too, about our separateness from the world, is the power, the transformative power of art, of representation, of imagery, to take a simple, and it's very, it's not posed in a very conscious way. It's just very straightforward, like anybody could take these pictures. To immortalize somebody in an artwork and give them some meaning to their life that's even more than just the time that they're living, because these works will last much longer than myself, I hope. And that immortalizes and amplifies, I think, the individuality of the individual, and that's the incredible power of art, the transformative power of art, to overcome and to create allegorical frameworks by which we can understand our unity with the world, but also our separateness from the world. So I think that was a long comment, a long answer, but a start.
That was a brilliant start. No, because when we thought how one could characterize, like in a nutshell, what alienation actually is, we had to look at the philosopher Rahel Yegi's work. She wrote both a dissertation and her latest book on alienation, and she sums it up in the formula of a relation of unrelatedness.
I like that.
I really like that, and that also brought us back to both Baudelaire and Edouard Manet, because Baudelaire described Edouard Manet as the painter of modern life. And I was always intrigued by Edouard Manet's paintings in terms of composition, because there's a very strong relation between the people, the figures in his paintings, in terms of an abstract, almost a formal way, but then the individual characters like completely drift apart. So you have a feeling of this like relation of an unrelatedness, or an identity or a disidentity, and you get a feeling for how the role that we perform in our daily life and our subjectivity are cut into separate things, which I think it really started at the time of Edouard Manet, which was in a way like the high time of capitalism and since then it has become even stronger. So maybe that it's a good time to switch over to the more like a formal part of the works, because what's really like interesting is this combination of photography and painting, the abstract monochrome, and then the almost like indexical relation to the reality or to the world.
In the 60s, I was, when I started doing what I thought of as, I've been doing artwork since I was very, very young. And I still have examples of my drawings done as very, very young. But I was only really understood what I thought of as a serious work of art when I was in my mid-20s in the 60s when I did. And I started off doing just monochrome paintings. I stopped all my representational drawings and such, and really had to engage with what is it that makes a work of art a distinct form of meaning. And I wanted to start at the zero dimension, the 0 point of the very beginning, just the field of the representation without a representation. But in the early 70s, or the late 60s and early 70s, with the political upheavals in the student movement and in the engagement with kind of a critical attitudes about society and about politics, it seemed necessary to bring the world into the work of art, to start to deal with representation. So I abandoned painting and took up photography, used the photograph as a way to engage with the subjects of the world, which was very, very effective throughout the 70s in my work. By the end of the 70s, painting as a discourse of painting, particularly from Germany, from Cologne, the Cologne painters were of very, very great interest to me. And I started exhibiting in Cologne at the Johann Schuttler Gallery in Cologne. So what I decided to do was bring the photography and my previous monochrome painting together. So they formed a kind of a dialectic of opposites there. And for me it worked, and it's worked ever since, to insert the representational photograph that engages with the subjects of the world with the field of meaning that is offered by the monochrome painting. It also allowed me to bring in color and formal elements that I really find important to me, and I just love color and I love texture. The texture even just of the painting, of the monochrome painting, is really sweet to my eye, you know, and it forms a kind of a relaxing space within the space, the conflicted spaces of the representational photography. So these kinds of dialectics or oppositions are important to me. In this work also, you see another opposition that's very important to me, and that's it's hard to say opposition, because I don't like to say it, because I'm a romantic, between man and woman. In other words, the politics of gender, which is very, very important to acknowledge, to engage with, to have something to say about it, to put it in front of us, to discuss the space that exists between man and woman. And this series does it in a very, very specific way, without creating a hierarchy of either, but creating an opposition without a hierarchy, I think. I'm getting a little bit away from the theme of alienation, perhaps, but to answer your comments about abstraction.
No, but I mean, we of course also invited you because we wanted to talk about your work in general, not just on alienation, which is always, of course, the case when you curate group exhibitions, that you force people to look at art in terms of a certain thesis or topic. So it's about much more than just alienation. But maybe we could switch to the Volta Benjamine piece, yes. Room in Portbou. Yeah, which you will also see upstairs.
Yeah, this is a work that I did in 1996. I was very much involved with a research and a critique of the writing and philosophy of Walter Benjamin. I did a series of 4 lectures at the University Castilla-La Mancha in Cuenca, Spain, on the theme. The professor that invited me to do the lectures wrote a book on Walter Benjamin, so I wanted to put my version of events in there, so as a dialogue with the professor that invited me. So this work was created in 1996 around that particular event. Walter Benjamin, as you know, was in 1940, September 1940, was trying to get to the United States as a Jewish leftist intellectual. He was not in the favor of the occupying forces of France at the time where he was living, and he couldn't return to his home in Germany, of course. So he was trying to get with a group of people, as you probably know the story, across the Spanish border into Spain, which at that time was still neutral, and to make his way to the United States. Right as they got to the border, they were stopped by the Spanish police, and Walter Benjamin, who already had a very, very tortured life, it was melancholic, felt the futility of history, of what was happened to him personally, committed suicide in his hotel room in Port Boo on the Spanish-French border in September 26, 1940. I was just had broken up from a very emotional romantic relationship from my partner who was in France at the time, and I left Toulouse and took the train to go to do some research in Port Boo. When I arrived in Port Boo late at night, it was raining and cold and it was midnight, and I went from the train station to the closest pension to get a room. The only room they had was so short, so small, I could touch the wall on either side with my hands. There was one window at the end of the room. The next day morning when I opened the window, hoping to see the Mediterranean and be relieved of my melancholy, it was just a brick wall. And I realized that this pension was right adjacent to the railway station, and on the other side of the brick wall were the trains. And it felt like a coffin for me. And here's the allegorical dimension of this work, is that immediately identified with the emotional distress of Walter Benjamin and his feeling of futility of the future. For me, it was in all comparison to totally trivial romantic feelings that I had, but important to me at the time, and I immediately just had this jolt in my body that said, this is it. This is a work. This is a moment that I had to address and speak about Walter Benjamin in relation to my own personal history. In this picture, just to, and how I work with, to a little indication of how I work, intuitively and very spontaneously too, beginning with the picture of the room with the brick wall, the stone wall, which also, there's another element to this. It reminds me of the work of Giorgio de Chirico on the theme of alienation. De Chirico's father was a railway engineer, and in a lot of Giorgio de Chirico's paintings, you see a wall with a train behind the wall. And so there was an immediate relationship between this image of the stone wall and the melancholic feeling of loss of de Chirico in relation to his father, the alienation from his father of the railway engineer that's on the other side of the wall. So there was that other dimension that exists in this particular work. I combined with this work to add to, in a sense, to the story, I combined a fragment of the death certificate of Walter Benjamin and a photograph of the bombed buildings in Port Boo from the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 39. And of course, that was another part of the tragedy, the historical tragedy that Walter Benjamin had to engage with in Port Boo, that there was actually more than one war going on in the historical conundrums of his life. The other irony, and I love ironies in life because irony forces you to take what seems to be a subject of truth and realize that on the other side of what might be a subject of truth is another story again. And the irony of the Walter Benjamin story is when the Spanish authorities wrote his death certificate the next morning when they found his body and they got his name reversed on his death certificate. It's Dr. Benjamin Walter instead of Walter Benjamin. So for 40 years since his death, his grave it was a fake grave because they didn't really know where he was buried because they didn't have the correct name. That it was only recently some German art historians found and realized when they examined the documents that they found the real grave of Walter Benjamin. And all these years, Anna Harand, Theodor Adorno were going to visit. What they weren't convinced it was the real grave either. It was just a tourist attraction after the war for people that wanted to engage with Walter Benjamin. So there's the ironies of history. So that's another long comment. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but it's
Okay.
fantastic to listen to you because there's also so much background information. What I like about these works is that they combine fragments, information, photos that you took, and all these elements function as kind of like signs that become also like that might even change the meaning over time. So maybe if we go to the last, the third piece in the exhibition, the tower, which is for me a very, very good example how a work, and it's actually from I think 1980.
No, this is 1996 as well.
1996. If you look at this image and with the Antarctica / an exhibition on alienation topic in mind, then this of course becomes a clear example of the Karl Marx reading of alienation. Then you see the factory, the exploited workers, etc. And also like from a very, very contemporary perspective, and we talked about this in the press conference this morning, you also in a way, or at least I, start to think about, if you consider like the US under Trump, the white male worker who not only lost his job but also like his identity, and so the abandoned factory is also like a strong sign for alienation. But maybe that's just like the curator's misreading of this work. But on the other hand, when we ask you if you wanted to participate in the exhibition, we also ask you for proposals of possible works, and I think that was your first choice, and at the Crossworks piece only came later when I was a bit like insistent, like I want this also in the exhibition.
Yes, to be really, in fact, I'm always, and I want to thank you, Vanessa and Nicholas, for inviting me to be here. It's to me a wonderful and rare opportunity. Now, I'm always considerate of the budgets of institutions like this, of galleries. So I'm thinking, oh my, what it's going to cost to send original new works all the way from Vancouver to Vienna. It's expensive, and it could blow your budget totally, but maybe not, we'll see. But I think of these things anyway. But I realized, oh yes, Hauser and Wirth in Zurich, in their reserve have these works, and it's very close. It's very easy to ship it. So, and they fit the theme perfectly, I felt. So that was why these ones. There's many other works of mine that also would fit the theme, but these ones, I was happy to have these ones brought out of the reserve to be seen again, to be refreshed, to be discussed again, because I'm sorry to say, I think they're important works. But, and I'm not shy to say that. And I also accept criticisms too, and there are some criticisms that can be done of these works. This work here on the theme of alienation has a bit of sense of humor, to make fun of myself as a man, as a male artist. It's really about a link, an allegorical link for me, between you might say, the post-industrial age we're in now, or the post-Fordist age, the post-production age, even though, in fact, we're still in a production age, but still, we're looking that direction. I was in Barcelona in 1996. There's an English art school, has a residency there, the Winchester School of Art, and they had invited me in 1996 to come and do some lectures at the art school there. And I looked out of the window of one of the upstairs studios, and this is what I saw. And it's in the Poblenou area of Barcelona, where there used to be an industrial factory district. The factories were removed, but the towers were left. Now the tower is a function of the factory. Now these towers have no function anymore. Now the tower, for me, I saw as an allegory on the male phallus. And so I jokingly see the redundant tower as the phallus without function in this new age. It's a little bit of making fun of the male sexuality, and the images that we see linked to it, which are done in serigraph the photograph is laminated on canvas, then I paint the monochrome for the serigraph, and then serigraph on top. Is on the side is I thought, well, what is the ideal image of the male in the history of art? And that's the sculpture of Polykleitos. Fantastic, a radical sculptor in his time. So I took a detail of a sculpture by Polykleitos, but with a broken nose. That is this very obscure image you see here. It's just a detail of a portrait of a sculpture by Polykleitos, but with the nose broken off, which again is a joking kind of attack on the dysfunctional phallus. The nose is the phallus and knocked off. And the top image is a diagram of a plinth on which the sculpture of Polykleitos was. In fact, you see, you can't read it here, but his signature is actually on the plinth. And there's two marks where the feet of the sculpture were, you see on the plinth. So this is the heroic male body now has been toppled from the plinth, the nose broken, the tower having no function, or the phallic tower with no function. So that relates to the theme of alienation, I think. But for me, kind of in a joking way. Not many of my works have this kind of ironic humor in them, but I enjoy this work for that aspect, to bring out another side of my convoluted personality, I think.
Maybe one concluding question, because it's already 20 to 7. Time is running.
Oh, yeah. Performance coming up.
Yeah. No, and also I just noticed that the video projector is so bad. I mean, it's really not the ideal way to show your images, so people should have the opportunity to see them very soon. Now, one concluding question. When we thought about alienation, of course, we noticed that's a very Western and, of course, a very modernist issue. Do you think that it's still a valid concept today?
I think more valid than ever, because we are, through our development of self-awareness, are more aware of what our identity means, and the questioning, say, of male identity by the feminist movement is an important kind of questioning to bring into question what these identity structures are, and to acknowledge the contradictions that can exist between where we feel assured about our identity and the reality of where our identity is being constantly erased by developments of modern information world today, and where we identify with our social identities and where we don't identify with our social identities. So I think the theme of the exhibition is, and the way it's been described in the brochure, in the catalog, in the writing that's around the individual works, and the individual works, not just my own, but the individual works in the exhibition, I think is really, really strong, really amazing. And so I congratulate you and Nicholas and all your team here at the Kunsthalle for what you've been able to put together. and I hope everybody has a chance to really engage with the complexity of thinking that exists in all of the works in the exhibition.
Yeah, but no good exhibitions without brilliant artists, so thank you, Ian, for being here. Yeah.
Thank you.